Well, nearly 3 years after the brutal killings of those 4 college students in Idaho, the man accused of murdering them is now set to plead guilty, cutting a deal, Brian Kohberger, in order to avoid the death penalty. As first reported here on NewsNation Now by Brian Enton last night, trial attorney Misty Marris joining us today with more on this. It came as quite a surprise at the time. I know the families will play some more clips from one of the fathers of one of the victims. Furious in many cases about this, that the deal is being cut and that there's no death penalty. What's your reaction?
You know, Connell, I'm not surprised to see that this happened. It just came as a surprise as far as the timing, because both the prosecution was vehemently moving forward with the death penalty and the defense had really dug in their heels and said Brian Kohberger did not do this. But Connell, whenever you have a death penalty case, that is a negotiation point from the perspective of prosecutors. Taking the death penalty off the table is something that will be enticing for the defense. Also, Connell, leading up to this, there had been several major setbacks for the defense. They wanted to raise a third-party culprit defense, meaning somebody else did it. Judge said no. They wanted to raise an alibi defense. Judge said no. And there were a whole host of evidentiary motions that went in favor of prosecutors. So given all of that, it might have been time to take that deal. And from the prosecutor's perspective, I know the families are very, very upset, and understandably, this is a horrific case. It's really the known versus the unknown, right? Because at trial, anything can happen. It can seem like a lock, but you get one holdout jury, you get a hung jury, you get reasonable doubt potentially. And of course, with the death penalty, you need the jury to be unanimous on that as well. So a lot of competing factors going into this decision.
To that point about the dad, we had a clip last hour from Ashley Benfield's show last night, but here's another on reaction to the fact that there was a deal, a plea deal. Take a listen.
Ever since Hitler's demanded an independent investigation, they couldn't get away from this case fast enough. They've done everything to make this case go away. So I don't know what that entails, but he said he was going to have an independent investigator, and all of a sudden we seemed like we were on rails to get rid of this case and make a plea deal.
Is there truth to that? Can you give us context behind that?
Well, yeah, so I don't know what the truth to that is. There are victims' rights laws, and they're in every state, and they're in Idaho, and it requires prosecutors to inform the victims if there's going to be a plea. They have the right to speak at sentencing. But Connell, something stunning about this case, just going back to the very beginning, and it's come out through statements from the families throughout the entirety of this investigation leading right up to this decision for a plea deal, is that the families had publicly stated that they felt like they weren't part of the process, that it was actually very adversarial with the prosecutors, that they didn't have information. They were actually learning it along with us as the public, as information came out from being under seal. Remember, a lot of this case had been under seal or part of a gag order. In a very unique and kind of stunning situation, there was a gag order at the very beginning of the case that actually gagged the victims' families as well. That's unusual. That's really not something that you see because they have a First Amendment right to speak out. So all of that seems to be a lot about the process leading up to here, that the family just felt like they weren't a part of it. And that's kind of been the consistent narrative throughout this entire case.
Let me go back to your first point, or one of your first points about the risks of going to trial, and talk about the evidence against this guy that they had a little bit, okay? And that's another point that the dad made, and let me play that clip from Ashley's show, and then we'll come back and talk about how you saw the evidence. And, you know, you need, as you said, oh, wait, hold on a second, Misty. We have some breaking news on another case you've been following. There's a verdict coming in, or the verdict is in the Diddy trial, okay? So on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, we have a verdict. Go ahead, Jamie. So what was the verdict? Unable to get a unanimous verdict on count 1, Misty. No unanimous verdict on count 1, okay? So that's first. So the judge is hearing from the government and the defense on proposals to send back the jury. All right, let me repeat that. So this is the sixth note from the jury. They have reached a verdict on counts 2, 3, 4, and 5, but they're unable to get a unanimous count Vote on count one. So now they're going back and forth in court on proposals to send back the jury. So where does this go, Misty, I wonder?
Right. This is interesting. So they're unanimous on 2, 3, 4, and 5. I happen to have my handy-dandy verdict sheet right here, Connell.
Yep.
So that means they're unanimous on the sex trafficking. That's count 2 relating to Cassie Ventura.
Okay.
They're unanimous on the Mann Act. They're unanimous on sex trafficking, Jane. Unanimous on prostitution, crossing the line, state lines, prostitution, Jane. It means they're not unanimous on racketeering.
So racketeering's count 1.
Yes,
right?
Count 1. So the judge is making a determination to send the jury back into the jury room in order to continue to deliberate. Now, what we're talking about here, both parties are saying, what is the instruction going to be? Is it going to be go back in the jury room and deliberate, or is it going to be what we call a dynamite charge, which is basically the last chance. It's the last-ditch effort. Everybody go back in. The people that are in the minority, listen to those in the majority and have an open mind. Don't change your convictions, but have an open mind. So what will be communicated is going to be critical to how quickly this case gets done.
Well, we've had so many conversations about this, especially in the early part of the trial, in particular, Misty, about the RICO charge, right? That would be, you know, you're basically asking this jury to say that this guy is at the head of a criminal enterprise, kind of like a mob boss, which is what we've compared it to in the past. So that's the one where they can't get to a unanimous verdict, which probably, if you were going to pick one, wouldn't necessarily be a surprise. I mean, what did you think of the racketeering charge to begin with?
Not at all. I actually thought the racketeering charge would either be an acquittal or
right.
it would be a hung jury, because it's really complicated. You have to agree not only that there was a conspiracy and an enterprise, those are threshold questions, but you also, as a jury, have to unanimously agree on the underlying 2 predicate crimes that are required to establish RICO. So all of that in total, that's a lot of agreeing, Connell. That's a lot of unanimity, right? So it's difficult to come to a consensus on that. I always felt like it was thin, but I'm not surprised to hear a hung jury. That, to me, and listen, that hasn't been declared, by the way. I'm saying hung jury,
right.
but it's not a hung jury till the judge declares it. But I'm not surprised to hear that they're having difficulty coming to a consensus on that count. So
one of the options available to the judge in this case is to accept this partial verdict that's been reached. In other words, you could say, right, that, all right, you can't get an agreement on racketeering. Okay, fine. That's where the hung jury is, but we'll accept the verdict, which they've reached on the other charges. We don't know what the verdict is, but they could just, the judge could just accept the partial verdict, right?
Yes, at some point, but he would have to read what we call the dynamite charge first, an Allen charge.
Allen charge, so, right.
Yes.
Okay, so explain that a little.
He'll either read the Allen charge or the dynamite charge, and which would tell the jury to really listen to those that are in the, whoever's in the minority, to listen to who's in the majority, keep an open mind, listen to the arguments. So he'll listen to that, or he'll make a decision. The judge will make a decision whether to read the Allen charge or whether or not to say go back in and deliberate and maybe read the Allen charge at a later time. That's what the lawyers are likely speaking about with the court right now. Okay, so now it's time to kind of take a second and think about the testimony that we had in the trial. So what stood out to you now that we know there's been a partial verdict? Again, we don't know what the partial verdict is. We just know that on the one charge, on the RICO charges, racketeering, they can't reach a unanimous verdict. Cassie testimony, the one we known as Jane, the other victim that claimed to have forced sexual encounters with Diddy. What stood out to you testimony-wise here that you think this jury was really, and based on maybe some of the questions or the testimony that they wanted back, thinking about before they came back with this today? Listen, when I'm thinking about the jury questions, the first question was about one of the underlying acts of the predicate crimes, the acts involving drug distribution. So that was the first question. Right before, earlier today, around 11 o'clock, there was a question where the jury asked to see testimony regarding some critical moments in the trial. That relates to Cassie Ventura, that 2016 Intercontinental incident. They wanted to see that testimony. Testimony regarding the plane that she took back from the Cannes Film Festival, where Combs had showed her explicit videos, and she took that as a threat, planned to freak off when she got off the plane. That relates to sex trafficking. That another other testimony from Daniel Phillips, who's one of the escorts, who had seen Combs be violent with her, according to his testimony on the stand. By the way, Connell, those 3 questions mirrored what prosecutors highlighted in their closing about the sex trafficking relating to Ventura. They said these 3 incidents really illustrate this. You don't have to find that it's sex trafficking every single time. She testified there's hundreds of freak-offs, but all you have to do is find one. So I found it interesting that the jury wanted to see that testimony specifically, and it really speaks to the heart of the prosecution's case.
All right, let me give you a little bit more color that's coming out of the courtroom right now. One of the headlines is that the judge is at least giving an initial indication that this jury will continue deliberating. Remember, they've reached a verdict, this partial verdict, as we're describing it, on 4 of the 5 counts against Sean Combs. The one that they have not reached a unanimous verdict on is the racketeering charge. Now, it's 4:46 p.m. as you look at the courthouse in Lower Manhattan at 500 Pearl Street. The note came in from the jury at 4:05, so earlier this hour, and the prosecution wanted the judge, they made the argument for the judge to deliver what Misty was just talking about, the Allen charge. Diddy's attorney, Mark Agnifilo, said, no, it's too soon for that. We want the jury to keep deliberating. Again, the initial indication, to try to confirm this, is that the judge is going to instruct or has instructed the jury to keep deliberating on that. So that wouldn't surprise you, Misty, necessarily, if that's the way that the judge is going about it, that it would, hey, just take a little bit more time here. I know you guys got 4 out of 5, but take a little bit more time and try to get them all decided.
Yep, not at all. Doesn't surprise me. Think about it. They've been deliberating for like 12, 13 hours at this point. It's not like a week. It's not a tremendous amount of time when you think, I'd say it feels like it, right? For those of us who've been following, but it's not a tremendous amount of time, and it's not unusual for the judge to instruct to go back to deliberate the first time there is a deadlock. If they remain deadlocked, we'll likely hear that Allen charge read after they've been given this opportunity to go back in and deliberate. So it's not surprising to say this time around, go back in there, see what you can do, but the next time you're going to get that fire of the dynamite charge. It's called dynamite for a reason, Connell.
Right.
The fire of the dynamite charge, which would be the last-ditch effort. And if they can't come to a consensus after that, that's when you would hear we declare count 1 hung.
So before I get a live report from the courthouse, let me ask you one more question, just because the way we've always been reporting on this is that Combs, if he was convicted on the quote-unquote most serious charge, could face life in prison. So that's count 1, right, Misty, the racketeering charge? So what's on the line here, in other words, in terms of prison time?
Right. So transportation to engage in prostitution, maximum sentence 10 years. Maximum. Be careful of maximums. Most people don't get the maximum. Sex trafficking, this is important, Connell. Minimum statutory sentence of 15 years. So if he's convicted on either one of those counts of sex trafficking, it's a 15-year statutory minimum. RICO, that can carry up to life in prison. However, there is no statutory minimum sentence. So it would depend on what predicate crimes were found to have been committed, and that would all go into the guidelines as far as what the judge would sentence.
That one count of racketeering conspiracy is where we do not have a unanimous verdict. That's where the jury is deadlocked. Misty, stand by if you can. Marcus Espinosa.